Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Rainfall warnings continue for much of southern Alberta and northern Saskatchewan as the storm system slowly makes its way out. We hear about how a church in Medicine Hat helped a Ukrainian family flee the war with Russia. And more candidates have come forward seeking the UCP leadership. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson has the details.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A number of federal Conservative MPs are demanding that our country's public safety minister, Marco Mendicino, resign. They say Mendicino misled Canadians originally when it came to why the federal government invoked the Emergencies Act. Interim Conservative leader Candice Bergen says Mendicino needs to resign right now.
Well, the Minister of Public Safety has misled Canadians several times. He said protesters started fires in an Ottawa apartment building. That was false. He said foreign money was funding the protest. Not true. And he said law enforcement asked for the Emergencies Act. Also false. So does the Prime Minister agree that Canadians deserve better than a minister who repeatedly and overtly misleads them?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we see right now is the Conservative Party desperately trying to distract Canadians from the fact that they stood with these illegal blockaders. They encouraged them. They continue to make apologies for having these people having shut down communities, hurt our economy, cost people jobs at the same time as police were trying to do their jobs. They asked for more tools. We granted them more tools with the Emergencies Act, and we were able to get things back to normal in this country.
A number of Canadians are quite concerned over a piece of federal legislation known as Bill C-11. Now, you can include Lethbridge MP Rachel Thomas in that group. Thomas says the bill is the Trudeau Liberals' way of censoring what we can see, host, or post online. The feds say they're simply trying to protect Canadian content and Canadian culture. Thomas says the government should not be forcing content in front of our eyeballs.
Obviously, this is detrimental to you because at the end of the day, your choices should be respected and the government shouldn't be dictating the content that you watch. In addition to that, you rely on your search bar to find stuff that you like rather than what the government wants to curate for you. The other problem with this is, of course, creators depend on the current algorithms that exist within YouTube or TikTok, etc., to be discovered and to be able to promote their material, which is great for them because they can make a go of it. And if the government were to get in there and start controlling that, of course, again, it would be incredibly harmful to those new media or digital first creators.
MPs will soon be voting on whether to adopt the Liberals' mandatory minimums bill and send it to the Senate. Now, Bill C-5 would amend the criminal code to remove mandatory minimum sentences for all drug convictions and for some firearms and tobacco-related crimes. Prosecutors would also be required to consider referring defendants to treatment programs instead of charging them for simple drug possession offences. Conservative MP Shannon Stubbs says her constituents want tougher and not more lenient sentences.
Violent crime is rising in big cities and rural regions alike. Rhonda owns a country store in a community of 10 people. Since 2019, she's been the victim of 3 armed robberies with a knife, a machete, and a gun. It's appalling that her experiences are becoming common in Lakeland. The NDP Liberals should have her back, but instead they're reducing penalties for the very crimes against her.
Although the feds are suspending the travel mandates for airlines and trains on June 20th, travelers will still be faced with the COVID-19 mandates if they're planning on going on a cruise. Proof of vaccination and a negative test is still required. An official with the AMA Travel says requirements could be different depending on which cruise line you were on and which country you were in.
We've even seen that recently in the announcement from the Canadian government as to what are the health and safety and COVID-related travel requirements when getting on a cruise leaving Canada or returning on a cruise into Canada. A lot of people book their cruises quite far out. Those rules can change between the time when you've booked and when you depart, and you will have to adhere to what the rules are at the time that you're leaving on your cruise. Really what it comes down to now is, are people going to be comfortable with understanding that that the testing requirements might change, or if you do contract COVID on board, yes, you could be quarantined into your cabin.
A number of travel agencies, including TripCentral.ca, say they expect demand for vacation packages to increase following Ottawa's decision to end the mandates for domestic and outbound international travelers next Monday. The United Conservative Party will be choosing its new leader in October. It is a pretty crowded field of candidates, with the number now sitting at 8. Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, says some may bow out of the race early if they fail to raise the large registration fee and collect enough signatures.
On top of that 150,000, there's another 25,000 that's sort of a deposit that I guess is to sort of guarantee good behavior in the race, which is, it says something about politics maybe if that's where it needs to go. So yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money that people need to come up with. So you look at that slew of candidates and some of the independents who might be running. There's a small town mayor who's going to be running, and you have to wonder whether or not they can come up with that sort of cash in the next little while here. And there's also signatures. You need, I think, 2,000 or 1,000 signatures from around the province, and you need 200 from each of sort of the 5 zones in the province.
Political reporter Tyler Dawson will also have details of the alleged bullying taking place within the Alberta NDP. Full details coming up after business news. The opposition NDP in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba are urging Ottawa to scrap proposed changes to food labeling for ground beef and pork. Health Canada is planning to require front-of-package nutrition symbols for foods containing 15% or more of recommended daily intakes of sodium, sugar, and saturated fats. Saskatchewan's agriculture critic Trent Weatherspoon says the labeling changes will hurt producers by suggesting to consumers that beef and pork are dangerous. Weatherspoon sent a letter to Ottawa signed by his counterparts in Alberta and Manitoba outlining their concerns. More than 1 million homes and businesses in Alberta are now eligible for electricity rebates thanks to the Alberta government. The electricity rebate program will provide $150 in total energy rebates, with $50 for 3 consecutive months. With good news also comes those who see an opportunity. Staff from the Better Business Bureau say a new variation of a phishing scam is making the rounds for the rebate program through unsolicited texts.
Be very skeptical is the first thing. Just be skeptical about the message, about the information. Don't click on links as a rule. Those scammers are looking to grab personal and banking information. It's a message we constantly repeat, but people still fall for it. Some people, a small number. And that's really what scammers are doing. They're sending out thousands and thousands of these messages, trying to just get a few people that they can, respond and then start to gather their personal information.
To report a scam like this one, make sure you visit the Better Business Bureau Scam Tracker website. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is spreading a deadly litter of mines, bombs, and other explosive devices that are endangering many civilians' lives. Military officials in Ukraine are concerned that these landmines will claim even more lives long after the fighting has stopped.
Їздили 2 дні назад, проїжджав сюди, і нормально все було. І я ж кажу, перший раз теж проїхав нормально, за другим разом оце таке случилось.
Anywhere that troops moved through, anywhere that they stayed for any extended period of time, they appear to have laid anti-tank mines in order to defend their positions. And behind me is a Russian military position, and in front of it they laid anti-tank mines. And one of those anti-tank mines hit a tractor, destroyed it, and has closed off an area of these fields for cultivation. People are very eager to cultivate the land. They want to plant crops. They're expecting, to be able to deliver grain to the rest of the world. The agricultural companies that lease the land here are under huge pressure to generate food, and that's basically driving them. So people are taking risks. They're taking risks that might surprise you and I, but they're feeling under pressure to do so.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Special Operations Unit has begun planting its own anti-tank mines in the Donetsk region to try and deter advancing Russian troops. The unit mined the forest track with Soviet-era and German anti-tank mines to protect their flanks. Russia continues to pound the eastern Donbass region with relentless artillery and air raids. U.S. President Joe Biden is working closely with European leaders to build temporary silos along the Ukrainian border and some in Poland to get some much-needed grain out as food in Ukraine is becoming even more scarce.
Working closely with our European partners to get 20 million tons of grain locked in Ukraine out onto the market to help bring down food prices. Folks, look, what Putin's war has done is not only try to wipe out the culture of the Ukrainians, decimate people and commit innumerable war crimes, but he's also prevented the grain, thousands of tons of grain that are locked up in those silos ready to be exported, but they can't get out through the Black Sea because they get blown out of the water.
A Ukrainian family has made the trek from their war-torn country to the city of Medicine Hat, Alberta, after fleeing the violence of the Russian invasion. The family is now settled into the community and have been working with the local church to start a new chapter. As PCN's Micah Quinn explains now, the family mentioned how grateful they were for this exciting new opportunity.
I now can say that I have friends here in Canada, and I feel good. I feel good that our family not alone.
Eva and Oleg Semenutin and their 3 children, Sophia, Caroline, and Eva, arrived from Poland to Toronto on April 25th. The family is originally from Kharkiv, Ukraine, and fled the country after Russia invaded. They stayed with a family for 3 weeks in Bow Island, Alberta, and then made their way to Medicine Hat. That's when the family was able to meet Nina Kraus, who speaks Russian and works for the First Assembly of God Church in the city.
I was more than happy to step up and help however I can. And the way that I could help them more than anything was with the translation. We have become really good friends as a result.
The Ukrainian family says everyone was so kind at the church, and they were able to help them out financially to settle down in Medicine Hat. Now the family is renting a house in the city.
We are very grateful, and for all community of this town and this church. I don't know what we will do without them.
Oleg now has a job at Wood Visions as a carpenter and is going to the Samis Immigration Services Association to study English. And Eva is currently on the hunt for a new job.
Thursday, I will have a meeting with UMCA Employer Center, and I hope so that they can help me to find a job.
The family was able to receive a deal with Shaw where they get unlimited texting and calling to Ukraine to chat with loved ones and friends. Oleg's mother is currently still in Ukraine taking care of her own mother, who is quite sick. The family says they're hoping to bring them to Canada when the time is right. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
That's a great story. A benefit concert will be taking place Thursday to raise funds for Ukrainian refugees living here in Lethbridge. In collaboration with Project Sunflower, the grade 8 band students at Gilbert Patterson Middle School are hosting their year-end band show where all proceeds at the door will be donated to the organization. A spokesperson with Project Sunflower says it was the students who decided they wanted to donate to such a worthwhile cause.
It's like comforting for us to have that community support. So I was very touched when the students on their own decided that they wanted to raise funds for Ukrainians. And like for me, I feel very privileged to be able to help as best I can. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket, but many drops make a full bucket, right? So
Thursday's concert starts at 7 p.m. with the doors opening at 6:30. The Lethbridge Ywca has a new leader at the helm. Jill Young was appointed the group's new chief executive officer. Young said she spent the last 16 years in business and recently moved to Lethbridge. Young has close to 20 years of experience in leadership and working with multi-million-dollar business operations and hospitality. She most recently was a director with the Oilers Entertainment Group, where she was responsible for strategic planning, financial operations, and community planning. Young and interim CEO Tracy James met with city officials to put a game plan together, setting clear objectives for the YWCA in Lethbridge moving forward. The Lethbridge K-9 unit has a new 4-legged addition to their team, and they need the public's help in naming it. The LPS is holding a puppy naming contest for the new 12-week-old puppy before he begins his new career. Constable Braylon Higgins says this is also the first time in decades that the LPS will be training and testing a puppy at the station.
We have bought our dogs usually when they're anywhere from 14 months to 2 years old, and their green dogs don't have any training. And so this option here, we decided to give it a try and put some foundation work into him prior to going into the full 20-week canine handler course when the next handler is selected.
What a cutie. Once the puppy has a name, he will begin extensive training, including agility, tracking, evidence searching, and obedience. More details on the puppy naming contest can be found on our website, bridgecitynews.ca. The heavy rainfall we've been experiencing in Alberta is expected to move into Saskatchewan. Environment Canada issued rainfall warnings for much of southern Alberta and parts of northern Saskatchewan. There's also a wind warning for gusts up to 90 kilometers an hour for southeastern Alberta and southwestern Saskatchewan. The weather agency says the rain will gradually ease off from the west to the east, and calmer winds should prevail by Thursday. While many parts of the province were being drenched by heavy rain, a large amount of snow is falling in the mountain parks west of Calgary. Peter Lougheed Provincial Park was hit hard over the last few days when cooler temperatures turned the rain into a late spring snowstorm. Campgrounds and trailheads that would normally be filled with hikers at this time of year were deserted. The province is advising that several highways in the area are closed due to avalanche hazards. Canada's Federal Minister of International Development, Harjit Sajjan, announced that the fire-ravaged region of Lytton, BC, will receive millions of dollars from Ottawa to help it rebuild into an energy-efficient community.
Announcing over $77 million in funding to rebuild Lytton in supporting the village, its people, and its businesses. And it is why I'm announcing a federal investment of $64 million in funding for Lytton to rebuild key community buildings, public spaces such as community centers and libraries that are incredibly important to our towns. And it is why that we must continue to invest in these facilities. Getting people back to the places they raise their families and call home is critical. It is why I'm also announcing $6 million for the Lytton Homeowner Rebuild Program to help homeowners who plan to rebuild and want to rebuild for the future.
A number of Canadian postal workers are allegedly not happy with their employer, Canada Post. They feel that their freedoms have been taken away with the federal government's COVID-19 restrictions. Jo Martin is with the group Posties for Freedom, and she says some even feel betrayed by their employer since they haven't been paid for 7 months due to resisting the government mandates.
I have been an employee at Canada Post since I was 18 years old, and I have never felt that anything but gratitude for my employer. And this, I know, has scarred me and many other employees. So what has been the hardest part is watching the level of nonchalantness. It's almost like it's not a big deal that all of these people have gone 7 months without a paycheck.
Catch the very informative and passionate interview with Jo Martin with Posties for Freedom coming up in the second half of our program. The shooter who killed 10 people at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, has been charged with federal hate crimes. Peyton Gendron, if convicted, could face the death penalty. He's already pleaded not guilty to state-level charges, including hate-motivated domestic terrorism and murder following the May 14th rampage. The 18-year-old has been jailed without bail since his arrest. Authorities say Gendron's racist worldview and extensive preparation for the massacre are laid out in online documents. Flooding continues in many regions around Yellowstone National Park. Now here's some dramatic video of a house near the park that fell into a river after the earth gave way underneath it. Fortunately, no one was in the home at the time. Heavy rain and melting snow have caused major flooding, widespread damage, and triggered evacuations around the park. Wow, that's incredible. Officials at Yellowstone National Park say over 10,000 visitors have now evacuated the park as they evaluate damage from the massive flooding.
All visitors are currently out of Yellowstone. Because it's mid-June, because Yellowstone has a lot of backcountry use, we had a large number of backcountry campers and users that we've tracked, have made contact with. We have put a full closure of the Yellowstone backcountry into place, and we have contacted or know the whereabouts of every backcountry user currently in Yellowstone. Right now, there's only one group remaining in the Northern Range. We have made contact with them. We were prepared to do helicopter evacuations if necessary. That hasn't been necessary up to this point.
Well, rain also continued in our region and across much of southwestern Alberta. It should, however, be ending very soon. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. It was another cooler and rainy day here in Lethbridge. We've seen 5 to 10 millimeters of the wet stuff, along with gusty winds up to 50 kilometers an hour. Tonight, there's a slight chance of more showers developing with a low near 7. Thursday, mainly sunny with a high expected near 18. Friday, lots of sunshine again with the mercury climbing up to 25. A low pressure system returns on Saturday, bringing clouds, showers, and a high of only 19. Sunday, pretty much the same picture with a high near 19 degrees. Slightly cooler on Monday, with more rain developing and a high of only 17. Tuesday, the rain cloud should leave us, and we should see a high near 22. Now checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 22 degrees and an average low of 9. The highest temperature recorded on this day was 32 degrees back in 1961, and the record low was 2 degrees set back in 1994. The sun rose at 5:23 and the sun set at 9:40. Looking at Thursday's national forecast now, expect more rain in Victoria with a high of 16. Periods of rain developing at 18 degrees in Vancouver. Calgary, which has been dealing with a lot of flooding lately, will see more showers and a high of 16. A good chance of a thunder shower and a high of 21 for Edmonton. It should be mainly sunny at 25 degrees in Regina. A few clouds at 24 degrees for Saskatoon. Sunshine at 23 is on tap for Winnipeg on Thursday. In the central part of the country, it should be quite humid. Expect thunder showers at 29 in Toronto. Rain at 29 degrees as well in Ottawa. A good chance of showers developing at 27 for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, you should see increasing cloudiness at 25 in Fredericton. Sunshine at 25 as well in Halifax. A few clouds at 24 in Charlottetown. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, it should be mainly sunny with a high of 20 degrees on Thursday. The Canadian housing market saw a slowdown to more normal levels of sales activity last month as prices flattened. The Canadian Real Estate Association says sales were down 9% from April and 22% from the same month last year due to rising interest rates. CREA says May's sales resembled levels of activity seen in the second half of 2019 prior to the pandemic. The average seasonally adjusted price in May sat at around $700,000. That is down nearly 4% from April. Microsoft has officially sent Internet Explorer into retirement. Microsoft says it will no longer support the browser. Its launch in 1995 signaled the beginning of the end of the web's first widely popular browser, Netscape Navigator. Today, Google's Chrome browser dominates with about 65% of the worldwide browser market share. IE's Air, Microsoft Edge, lags behind with about 4%. U.S. media giant Walt Disney and India's Reliance Industries have won the broadcasting rights for the Indian Premier League for more than $6 billion. That makes the 2020 cricket competition one of the most lucrative sports leagues in the world in terms of cost per game. Officials say the dual bid will retain broadcasting rights from 2023 to 2027. Leading international cricket stars participate in the IPL, which has continued to grow significantly since its first season back in 2008. Elon Musk is addressing employees from Twitter. It's the first time since the billionaire and Tesla CEO offered $44 billion US to purchase the social media platform. Musk reached a deal to buy Twitter in April, but clashed with the company repeatedly since then over the number of bots or fake accounts that exist on the social media platform. He said on May 13th he was putting the deal on hold since he needed more information from the company about those bot accounts. It's not clear if this week's meeting means the two sides have come any closer together in resolving those issues. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 63 points on the day to finish at 19,611. The Dow was up 303 points to 30,668. The S&P 500 was up 54 points to 3789. And the Nasdaq was up 270 on the day to 11,099. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $3.62 to $115.31 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 23 cents to $7.42 US. Gold was down a cent to $18.33.81 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $21.69 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $14.56 per bushel, barley's at $9.90, canola's at $24.40, and corn is at $12.19 per bushel. Live cattle were up $2.35 to $137.55. Feeder cattle August contract is up $1.98 to $173.28, and lean hogs July contract was up $1.65 to $108.28. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 77.59 US. Recapping one of our top stories, first it was government officials speaking out, and now it's opposition parties from across Western Canada. The opposition parties in Alberta, Saskatchewan and Manitoba are urging Ottawa to scrap proposed changes to food labeling for ground beef and pork. Health Canada is planning to require front-of-package nutrition symbols for foods containing 15% or more of recommended daily intakes of sodium, sugar and saturated fat. New candidates have put their names forward to become the new leader of the UCP here in Alberta. The party is picking its new premier in October. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details for us shortly.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Explore the exciting and delicious downtown food scene at Foodie Fest on Tuesday, June 28th. Food trucks will gather at Galt Gardens with other amazing opportunities to enjoy the many downtown restaurants with free samples. Plus, select stores will also be open late for shopping. It will be great fun for everyone. For more information, visit the Downtown Lethbridge BRZ Facebook page. The Interfaith Food Bank invites you to join them on Canada Day at Galt Gardens. On July 1st, come celebrate our great country of Canada with a charity breakfast, live performances on the community stage, LeBaron's Car Show, picnic in the park, and so much more. Activities will showcase Canadian culture, diversity, traditions, food, and music. To find out more, visit interfaithfoodbank.ca/events. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
8 candidates have now thrown their hats in the ring to replace Jason Kenney as Premier of Alberta. They include former Alberta government ministers Travis Taves, Rebecca Schultz and Rajan Sani, also former Wildrose Party leaders Brian Jean and Daniel Smith. To discuss the race and who may be the front-runner to succeed Premier Jason Kenney is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, joining us from Edmonton. Tyler, there are rumors running rampant that Conservative MP Michelle Rempel-Garner and Independent MLA Drew Barnes may also take a crack at the UCP leadership as well.
Yeah, the main takeaway at this point, I think, is that it's a really, really crowded field. There's reason to think it'll thin out in the next little while, but a lot of pretty high-powered candidates who are involved. Brian Jean, been a very consistent critic of the United Conservative government over the past year or two, who's obviously trying to make a comeback. So, I think you could probably place him in the front runner position at the moment. And the other person probably in that position would be Travis Taves, the finance minister, who has a lot of support from sort of people who are mad at Jason Kenney for breaking grassroots promises, as opposed to the people who are mad at Jason Kenney over some of the COVID mandates. So I think I'd probably place them in the sort of two front-runner positions, if there are front-runner positions at this point, because it's very early days, but it's going to be a crowded field. And I think, I talked to a lot of people in the last month or so who said, this is a challenging time for the party, but it's also a really exciting time for the party. You get to see competing visions of what it should be, to fire up the grassroots, fire up the base, talk about politics and policy and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be an interesting few months here until we decide, or until we see who the next leader is.
What I find really interesting as well is Calgary Tory MP Michelle Rempel-Garner potentially looking at it. What do we know at this point?
Yeah, mostly just rumor as far as I've heard at this point. I know reporters are chasing her, trying to find out for sure whether or not that's a move she's going to make. Obviously, she's in a bit of a strange position at the moment because she was working on Patrick Brown's leadership campaign for the federal Conservative Party. And if Pierre Poilievre wins that race, you have to wonder what her career maybe looks like in the federal Conservatives at that point. So, maybe this is a good time for her to make an exit and move on to provincial politics or something like that. But as I said, crowded field, and I think she would have, say, a challenging time maybe inserting herself in that field, even though I think she would have a lot of the name recognition and things like that could go a long way, particularly with less sort of long time actively involved grassroots sort of UCP members.
So when will the party be choosing its new leader?
Yeah, it'll be October 6th. They announced that this week. So what is that, 4 months away, give or take? The notable thing there, of course, is there's an election coming up. So that'll give them a reasonable amount of time anyways to put this person in the driver's seat and give them time to figure it out and build their own brand and all that sort of stuff that needs to be done before the election.
You know, and it's quite the process in running to become the leader of the United Conservatives of our party, period. You need deep pockets and a lot of support. I mean, the registration fee is what, $150,000? Is that not double what Kenny paid a few years ago?
Yeah, it is. He paid $75,000 was sort of the entry fee, shall we say, at that point. And on top of that $150,000, there's another $25,000 that's sort of a deposit that I guess is to sort of guarantee good behavior in the race, which is, it says something about politics maybe if that's where it needs to go. So yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money that people need to come up with. You know, so you look at that slew of candidates and some of the independents who might be running. There's a small town mayor who's going to be running, and you have to wonder whether or not they can come up with that sort of cash in the next little while here. And there's also signatures. You need, I think, 2,000 or 1,000 signatures from around the province, but you need 200 from each of sort of the 5 zones in the province. So, you know, you can't just sign up everybody in downtown Calgary and hope for the best. You do need to hit the road a little bit to get some of these signatures. So a lot of entry barriers, shall we say, maybe to get into this race. And it's obviously a crowded field even with that. So, well, I think I mentioned earlier that we might see sort of a natural thinning of this herd a little bit. And I think probably some of these requirements will knock at least a couple people out of this race in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, maybe this is the way the party decides to, you know, kind of determine who the pretenders are versus the contenders. People are really serious and put their money where their mouth is. Now, since Jason Kenney announced that he's stepping down as leader of the UCP, the party's fortunes have actually turned a little bit in the latest polls. According to Leger, Albertans are more likely to support the party under a new leader.
Well, yeah, you know, I think everyone kind of expected that the United Conservatives would get a little bit of a bump in the polls after Jason Kenney, because he was personally, tremendously unpopular. But the bump actually looks pretty good and is sort of moving the United Conservatives back into sort of majority government territory. Obviously, that could change. I mean, who knows? Maybe everyone will hate the next leader or whatever. But for the time being, it looks pretty good. You know, their number went from 35% of decided voters were going to cast a ballot for the NDP, or sorry, for the UCP. And that went up to, I think, 42%, whereas the NDP is around 40%. So a bit of a shift in the numbers there. I think we'll all be watching those pretty closely in the weeks and months ahead to see where they move, because going to that election, the question was a little bit, was Jason Kenney going to wear a lot of the bad decisions that people felt were bad decisions, or was the party going to wear those decisions? And so with Jason Kenney gone, what's the NDP strategy? Who can they blame? Can they blame Brian Jean if he's the next leader? Because he wasn't in government when these things happened. So, I think tactically for the NDP, they have to be looking at this with a little bit of concern, maybe, with an election less than a year out.
Now, speaking of the NDP, they're dealing with a little bit of controversy right now of bullying. Now, a recent story by the Canadian Press says elite staffers have been disrespecting volunteers, some of the grassroots members, and constituency association presidents. Tyler, where have we heard this before?
I know, it feels like we just went through this a couple months ago with the United Conservatives. Sounds like the exact same sort of thing, centralized sort of party power dictating to the grassroots members, which it's a much bigger problem, I think, probably in Canadian politics across the entire board. But it does show that there's a little bit of drama within the NDP. And the reason that that's sort of important is because the NDP has portrayed itself as being, a very tight ship, very well captained, no drama, government in waiting, not dealing with infighting like the United Conservatives have been for the past couple of years. This shows that the ship maybe has a couple leaks in it, and we're not talking mass revolt like we were with the UCP, but, there is a whiff of scandal here, and there's been demands for an investigation into it to see what's going on. So something else to keep an eye on, I think, because, as I said, election in less than a year, and every single one of these sorts of stories matters, I think, to parties when a vote's coming up.
If this actually blows up into something even bigger, do you think this could potentially lead to Rachel Notley resigning as leader of the NDP?
I have a hard time imagining they will dump Rachel Notley before the next election. I think she's done a pretty good job. I think most everyone in the NDP thinks she's done a good job. There isn't an obvious person to step in immediately and fill those shoes, I don't think. So I wouldn't say it's not possible. Anything's possible in politics, especially in Alberta politics. But I just can't see that happening, I don't think, unless it gets really, really, really bad.
Tyler, it's not just the UCP which is getting a new leader, but the Alberta Liberal Party is as well.
Yeah, I mean, who knew? They're going to have a leadership vote in September, I think it is. The interim leader's been in since last March, and he's going to be stepping down. So they're going to be looking for someone new. Who's going to want to fill those shoes? I have no idea. It's strange to think that a decade ago, the Alberta Liberal Party was, a somewhat influential political party, and haven't had a seat in the legislature in some time. So who knows? Maybe this election, maybe there's some space in the middle of Alberta politics right now for the Alberta Liberals to make a bit of a comeback. So, I think it's worth keeping an eye on some of those smaller parties.
Tyler, let's chat a bit about Bill 17, which recently passed at the legislature. It updated some labor law provisions. Can you talk about its true significance?
Well, it doesn't seem to have gotten all that much attention, but the big thing that this did was created bereavement leave for people whose pregnancy ends in something other than a live birth. So the case of a miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion, perhaps, they can get paid time off work for bereavement. And this is, I think a small but significant sort of legislative development, because I think at this point we all know someone who's gone through one of those experiences, and it's tough and it's hard, and to be able to take a few paid days off work to grieve that and to sort of deal with what comes next, I think is probably the sort of change that's really going to affect a lot of people. So as I say, it hasn't got a whole ton of notice, and of course it is sort of a labor law sort of provision. You see the sort of the title of it and go, labor law update or whatever. But it is the sort of small government change that actually is going to affect the lives of a lot of people, I think.
The province announced that it's moving on to stage 3 of lifting restrictions, including no more face mask wearing on public transit, and self-isolation will become more of a recommendation as opposed to mandatory. Tyler, the news about the restrictions being lifted was met with mixed reviews?
Yeah, I mean, obviously some doctors are not very happy about this. They're pointing to the hospitalization numbers. There's still about 880, somewhere in that range, people in hospitals, and about 25-ish, I think, in intensive care. So, they're pointing to those numbers, saying that COVID isn't over yet. Maybe it's a bit premature to drop some of those things. The big one that people probably noticed was the mask wearing on public transit, and Jason Kenney had, when that was kept in, and said, look, there are lots of vulnerable people who have no other way of getting around, so we might as well keep masks in on public transit. A little bit hard to say what has changed so dramatically to see why that has changed. But and then of course people are not super happy about some people, I should say, are not super happy about changing isolation to a recommendation. But this is part of the government's strategy. It's sort of narrative that we have to learn to live with COVID and move on from COVID and things like that. So that's where we're going to be at for the summer. Of course, the federal chief medical officer of health, Theresa Tam, saying that there could be a 7th wave come the fall. So I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll be right back into it in 3 months' time.
And then an 8th wave, a 9th wave, and then monkeypox.
Exactly.
We can't forget about monkeypox.
Right, of course.
Right. Now, Tyler, government officials here in the province are not happy. They're upset that Ottawa's looking at having producers put a potential warning label on ground beef, pork, veal, and lamb. Now, the label from Health Canada would warn that food contains more than, 15% of daily fat, sodium, sugar, or saturated fat?
Right. And so obviously with ground meat, I believe it is the fat that is at issue here. If the label comes in, this could lead to some sort of changes in the grocery store, as, grocery stores don't want to have warning label food on their shelves. So more lean meats might be what you're seeing on shelves. But the Alberta government has hit back on this, saying that it's, sort of a ludicrous proposal, that this sort of thing is supposed to be for processed food, not whole foods that are just meats or whatever. And of course, so they want an exemption for it. And so do some of the producers, because there are exemptions for other things. There's exemptions for dairy and eggs, for example, which are also kind of high in fat. So a little bit of a double standard thing going on there, maybe. It's just an easy political win for the Alberta government and for the Saskatchewan government too, that is sort of getting in on this. Very easy political win to fight back against warning labels on meat that is part of the second largest industry in the province. So, I think we'll probably hear more about that in the days ahead. And honestly, wouldn't totally surprise me if we saw the federal government back down a little bit on that.
My mother always used to tell me, eat the animal fat too, son. Not only is it tasty, but it's good for your body. So the Ottawa's trying to tell me that my mama's wrong? I don't think so. Mama's never wrong here. Come on. Now, the UCP is still pushing towards replacing the Rcmp with a provincial police force, Tyler. Justice Minister Tyler Shandro says an Alberta police force would be more accountable and responsive to policing more in the rural areas.
So this actually, I have to admit, surprised me a little bit, because a couple months ago, maybe a month ago, the rural municipalities of Alberta basically said they didn't like this idea, that they didn't want an Alberta Provincial Police Force. They liked the RCMP and didn't want the uncertainty of it. And then Tyler Shandro writing in the Red Deer Advocate, local paper, saying that the problem is that the RCMP is centralized in Ottawa. It's bureaucratic, it's unaccountable, it isn't policing the priorities that Albertans have, and so we should create our own police force. The history on this is a bit long. Of course, this was part of the Fair Deal panel. There was a big report that came out several months ago into the possibility of an Alberta Provincial Police. But it seemed to die down a little bit, and then with the rural municipalities saying they didn't like it, I admit I'd kind of wondered whether or not this was still sort of a front burner issue for the government. And obviously it'll be, if this is going to be a thing, it'll be in sort of the next election campaign platform. But this is a sign, I guess, is the point, that this is still on the agenda, that this is still something that the UCP is considering.
Legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
There have been many unintended consequences of Canada's federal and provincial restrictions and mandates. Early on, we saw restaurants resist the restrictions. There were many notable cases of resistance and ensuing court actions. We hear how the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms fought for pastors and business owners during the pandemic. Many have tried in a variety of ways to work within Canada's legal framework to bring back the complete freedoms we've had prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. One such group that is commencing court action is Posties for Freedom. And a spokesperson with the group, Jo Martin, joins us now from her home in Ottawa. Jo, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Exactly what is the purpose of Posties for Freedom, Jo?
So Posties for Freedom, at first, we were just a group of employees who felt that what was going on was wrong. We felt that we were not being heard, our concerns were not being heard. And so we needed a community to come together and really talk about those things and air some of those feelings out. And what really came of it is, a bunch of people coming together on a Zoom call and sharing their experience and sharing, very intimate parts of their lives. And some of them, discussing the employer's actions and discussing what we felt was wrong. And we just really morphed into this group that needed to take control back of their lives.
Are there a number of postal workers who are still unvaccinated?
We don't know how many are, or that's not really the point of what we're doing. I think what we're doing is standing up for the freedom of choice of all of the postal workers, because many settings are not in congregated settings. For example, I work from home. There's many posties that will go in, sort their mail, and then leave, and then they're alone the rest of the day. So it's never really been about whether you're vaccinated or not for us. It's really been about, if you want to have a choice to be vaccinated, you should have that choice.
So how long has your group really been advocating for postal workers, Jo?
We've been advocating for postal workers, personally myself, with the other founders of Posties for Freedom, since October. However, there are pockets of posties that have come together since way before, but the mandate was officially announced at Canada Post at the end of October. So that's really when posties obviously started coming together.
So how is your approach really different from other court actions we've been seeing recently?
Our approach isn't too different. It just has an extra couple of elements to it. And so a lot of other court proceedings are based on the Charter of Rights. They're based on our human rights, but we're also adding another element to ours, which is health and safety. And that is that the employer and the employee relationship is really defined in the labor code. And this is where we are sort of adding a section to our case and ensuring that, it's quite clear to all other federal workers as well that the employer-employee relationship is the one that's responsible for your health and safety at work. The public health agency can mandate anything they want. However, your employer is responsible for your safety.
Do you have any numbers at all of how many postal workers have lost their jobs or temporarily laid off throughout the pandemic with the restrictions?
So at the beginning, there was quite a few of us. We had heard, and because obviously the corporation doesn't share any of this with us, we had heard that there was around 16,000 of us that still had not attested by their deadline, and so they labeled us non-compliant if you were part of that group. So at first we had heard there was about 16,000, and then now it's what we have heard is a few thousand, but we're unsure again because we don't hear about this.
Now, we've been hearing of a man in British Columbia who's receiving compensation for what some are calling injuries from the mandated injections. He was temporarily paralyzed, but now he's been able to walk again. Missed quite a bit of time off of work. Do you feel this really helps your case?
I mean, I feel we have a strong argument no matter what, even with all of these other stories that continue to come out that do obviously help our case. I just want to share that my empathy goes out for this man and his family, because we can only assume that, the government did the very bare minimum to ensure that they supported this man through his injuries and for, the remainder of his life that he's going to, be like this. And what about his family? What about, his children? So Posties for Freedom is not just fighting for federal employees. We're also fighting for everybody else to get their fair compensation, because in the end, this is not just about if you're injured. It's about everybody not having had informed consent, not having had the opportunity to make a choice. And then, this is a decision that will live with them for the rest of their lives. And so how can you possibly be compensated for this? So I cannot imagine that poor man in BC has been fairly, dealt with.
So, Joe, what are you expecting to really see come out of these court proceedings?
We're not sure what's going to come out of them. We try not to set any expectations. What we do want to say is that we hope that what will come out of this, that we will restore our rights as employees, but also as Canadians here, is through standing up to the bully and making sure that, the responsibility goes with the employer. And what we feel is going to come out of these proceedings is really going to be not just our group, but a bunch of groups helping each other out through this. And hopefully there will be something good that comes out of it. So that's what we hope to come out of the court proceedings.
Joe, can you tell us exactly who's representing you as part of a legal team?
Yes, who's representing us is Rcmp Spencer in Cold Lake, Alberta.
So in total, in general here, how many postal employees do you think were really impacted by the actions of Canada Post?
I think all postal employees were impacted by this, whether they wanted to do this or not. I think that all employees were impacted by this because they never got informed consent. They were never really given a choice. It was really to them. They were labeled non-compliant if they didn't comply. And I think that that's a label that they gave us, or that they gave employees who did not want to comply in order to coerce others to do this. So I don't think any employees had a choice at Canada Post. I think everybody was coerced by this.
So Joe, can you give us what kind of evidence you'll be putting together as part of your case?
I don't think our evidence is going to be any different than other cases besides the health and safety aspect of it. I think that all cases that are going forward right now are very similar. I think that they're all charter rights, human rights violations. But like I said, I think ours has that health and safety component, and especially with federal workers, every federal entity has to have done certain checks and balances before they implement safety policies. And so we don't feel that those were adequately done. And we also have been asking for this information to be shared, and it's been very difficult to get it. So again, we don't have specific evidence to share just yet, but we do feel that ours is based on those three elements: the charter and the human rights and the health and safety.
So Joe, can you give us kind of an idea of what your job was like before And then after the restrictions?
Yes. So my job specifically before has changed quite a bit. I used to travel and do a lot of meetings on site with partners. However, now I worked from home starting March of 2020 and had been working from home since then. And like many of my fellow posties, have the opportunity to have a very low interaction with other employees. And, Canada Post put in a lot of safety policies before all of this came into place in order to, help out with the pandemic and ensure that everybody was safe. And so those restrictions are all lifting except the one restriction that is not being lifted and stopping many employees from being able to work.
Now, Joe, obviously you live in our nation's capital in Ottawa. What were your thoughts when you saw the truckers roll in and camp out during the Freedom Rally?
My thoughts were, thank goodness that something is finally happening. And thank you for standing up for what we felt, all of us have felt is wrong, I feel, at some point during the last 2 years. And it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. When the truckers came in, if you lived here, you saw a huge difference in the city.
And what has it been like now that restrictions have slowly been easing?
The city has been interesting. It's nice not to have to wear a mask everywhere and for people to start feeling less like they can't touch others or hug other people. I think Ottawa has become a bit of a place where people don't find a unification anymore. There's a lot of government workers here. There's a lot of employees that were impacted by this here in the city of Ottawa. So I personally feel that the city is very divided still. Restrictions could lift tomorrow. All these mandates could lift tomorrow, and they could apologize and admit that they made a mistake. And this is not going to fix what's happened to all of our communities. And I'm sure Ottawa is not an anomaly, but I do feel that Ottawa, specifically because it is the capital, because this is where all the decisions are made, and the House, the Parliament is here. I do feel that this has been one of the most dividing experiences, and I've lived here my whole life.
Now, Joe, you and many others have taken that strong stand, something you strongly believe in, against the restrictions and mandates. Can you share what's been the hardest thing for you during this very difficult time?
The hardest thing for me has been realizing that there's a very low level of care from my observations from the employer's perspective, very low level of concern for employee mental health, wellness. There is, from what I understand, very little check-ins. There's many managers, many directors that have employees on leave without pay going on 7 months now, very little check-ins. That hurts my heart on the deepest level. I have been an employee at Canada Post since I was 18 years old, and I have never felt that anything but gratitude for my employer. And this, I know, has scarred me and many other employees. So what has been the hardest part is watching the level of nonchalantness. It's almost like it's not a big deal that all of these people have gone 7 months without a paycheck.
So, Joe, you have the desk right now. You have a forum. You've got the stage. What message do you want to deliver to our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and his Liberal Party right now? What do you want to say to him?
I think that all mandates should be lifted. Personally, I would love to see the science that goes behind all of these decisions that are being made right now. It's very difficult to get any answers from anybody. I would love for the unification of Canada to be back where it once was. I was born here in Canada. I once was a very proud Canadian, and I feel very, very ashamed of how Canadians treat each other. I feel we are almost aiding the oppression that's going on with Canadians, and we're almost cheering each other on. And I feel that we should get back to a place where our leadership is somebody we can look up to, that takes people and brings us together and brings order where there's so much chaos. And you know, I think at the end of the day, every Canadian right now should be fighting with these groups of people. And I think that my message is not really for the Prime Minister. It's really for every Canadian out there that thinks that nobody's impacted by this anymore. COVID's gone away, all of this. I encourage you to join a group, go on postiesforfreedom.ca, donate, get in the community, help out, help any groups out, Feds for Freedom, Mounties for Freedom, just help any group out that's doing this right now, because everybody needs to get into this and be together as a unified front.
Voices need to be heard. Joe Martin is with Posties for Freedom. Thanks so much for joining us today from Ottawa.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.